Hello and welcome once again to what can only be described as the video. Thank you for being here once again to watch me run through the most recent Formula One Grand Prix as I take a fan's perspective, just a simple fan's perspective look at each race in the 2024 Formula One World Championship. This one was a bit different. Right, so this was, just make sure I get that. Okay. Round 3. Australia, Melbourne Park. I remember the first race in 1996 at Melbourne Park when the two Williams dominated Jacques Villeneuve in his very first race, and Damon Hill won the race, but he was right behind Jacques Villeneuve the whole race, and then in the sort of the last third of the race, I think Villeneuve's car started leaking oil badly, and it was going all over Hill, so they instructed Villeneuve to let Hill pass. I can't remember if Villeneuve then finished second in the race. I think he might have done, but he was dishing out oil left, right and centre into Hill. So Villeneuve was told to let Hill pass. But yeah, it's long time ago now, 28 years ago. So I'll do my normal thing, the rundown of the finishing positions in the race, and then the top 10 in the Drivers' Championship, and then the rundown of the 10 constructors. Okay. First, Sainz. Leclerc. Norris. I'm just going to make sure that the focus is correct. I got a bit jumpy there, sorry about that. Okay, so next up, Piastri, and 5th was Perez, wasn't it? 6th, Stroll, Tsunoda. Then it was, Alonso. Hulkenberg. Magnussen. Albon. 7-Eleven Albon. Ricardo. Gasly. Bottas. Joe. Ocon. Russell. Hamilton. Verstappen. Well, I'm not going to put 20th, of course, because there was no 20th place, was there? So now I'm going to do the Rundown of the top 10 in the Drivers' Championship. Okay. Leclerc, 47. Perez, 46. Sainz, 40. Piastri, 28. Norris, 27. Russell, 18. Alonso, 16. 9. Eight for Hamilton. Okay. Now the Constructors' Championship. Still like to make sure this is all in focus all the time. Redbull, 97. Ferrari, 93. McLaren, 55. Mercedes, 26. Aston Martin, 25. Let's just have a little drink. Okay. Okay. That's my usual ginger tea. 6th. RB. Don't like that name, silly. 7th. S. Williams. Sauber. Alpine. Okay, so what did we think of that race? Well, I have to say, first of all, I didn't watch the race live, and I was about to watch it in the evening, yesterday evening. Okay, it was on live, my time, about 4 o'clock in the morning in the UK, and I was about to watch it at about 7 o'clock in the evening. And literally about 3 minutes before I was due to watch it, the recording of it, I absent-mindedly looked on an app on my phone and saw the result. I saw who had won anyway, which I was very annoyed about, because that's just always irritated me massively whenever I see the result of a Grand Prix. It's happened only 3 or 4 times over the last sort of 40 years, but it annoys me massively every time it happens. But it's just one of those things, basically. These things happen, don't they? So, what did we think of that race? Before the race, of course, we had that really unusual thing that's, when was the last time that happened, I wondered, when a car basically was handed over to another driver, from one driver to another. The whole chassis, I think the gearbox and the engine, it was on the Williams, of course, after Albon's accident in qualifying, wasn't it? Or was it practice? I think it was qualifying, wasn't it? I think it was qualifying, wasn't it? Anyway, poor old Sargeant had his car taken off him, his chassis taken off him and given to Albon because they didn't have a spare chassis. Often the teams travel around without a spare chassis. And they clearly felt that Albon would stand a better chance of scoring points than Sargeant, which is a bit rough. That used to happen a lot in the 50s and the 60s, particularly the 50s, but I'm not aware of it ever happening. When we used to have spare cars in Formula One, it would often be the case that a spare car set up for one driver would be given to the other when they broke their car. And there would sometimes be a little bit of friction there because the driver that the car had been set up for, that the spare car had been set up for, would be a little bit miffed. That happened, for instance, in the 1986 British Grand Prix when Mansell's car broke at the start with just after Jacques Laffite's massive career-ending accident at the start of the race. Seconds after that, Mansell's car failed, but because the race had to be restarted due to Jacques Laffite's accident, Mansell was able to restart the race, but the spare car that weekend was set up for his teammate Nelson Piquet. No time to change it to Mansell's settings, so he had to drive a car that was set up for Piquet, but he still beat Piquet in the race. Mansell won and Piquet was second. And Piquet was understandably, well, not understandably necessarily, but he was a little bit miffed that the car set up for him for that race had been given to Mansell. But when you've only got one spare car, what can you do? But this is unprecedented, the actual race car of Sargeant being handed over to Albon. Now, of course, as I always say, Albon always finishes either 7th or 11th. I think he was in the 11th in the last race in Saudi Arabia. So if the team knew that, then they knew, well, there's a 50-50 chance of Albon scoring points in the race. So it's best to go with Albon. He was either going to finish 7th or 11th. Unfortunately, he did finish 11th. I don't know whether the team were aware of that statistic, that he always finishes 7th or 11th, but I certainly am, and I've told you about it before. So 50-50 chance, and he came home 11th, agonising with all the work that was put in, all the cost as well. Not just the cost of Albon's big accident, but also the cost of moving everything across to a different chassis, all the man hours needed, or the effort. Oh dear, massive. And in the end, all for nothing. Although it does put Williams 8th on 0 points ahead of Sauber and Alpine, probably because Sauber or an Alpine has not finished as high as 11th yet. So, yeah, that was the Sargeant bit. Now, as regards Sargeant and Sainz, it seems that two of my predictions are coming true. I reckon that Sargeant is in his final year in Formula One. I can't see him being kept. I said that at the beginning of the year. And I think this is a bit of an indication from Williams as to what they actually really think about Sargeant, going through all that effort to move the insides from one car to another, just in order to get Albon racing instead of Sargeant. There's a lot of effort, and it doesn't show a lot of faith in Sargeant. So I think he will be gone, unfortunately for him. Fortunate for other drivers coming in, but unfortunate for Sargeant. And as regards Sainz, I said at the beginning of the year that I thought he would have the beating of Leclerc this season. I think he's really fired up, having been fired, basically, or replaced by Hamilton for next year. I thought Sainz would be absolutely on a blinder this year, and he has been. He's third in Bahrain, and he's won this race comfortably. Would he have beaten Verstappen? Perez said that he thinks that the Ferraris would still have beaten the Red Bulls in this weekend, regardless of the brake issue that Verstappen had that caused his retirement on, I think, lap 3, his brakes sticking He basically had the handbrake on, as he described it, for the first 3 laps of the race. And during qualifying, apparently he couldn't drive around corners, and yet he still qualified on pole. So that shows how good the Red Bull is. But it was struggling all weekend, and Perez thinks that they would have still been beaten by Ferrari. I thought the McLarens would do very well this race. And they did, 3rd and 4th. Norris could have got a 2nd. Leclerc had the fastest lap, didn't he? Let me just put that in there. The swap between Norris and Piastri that happened towards the end of the race. They were not on different strategies. Piastri was seemed to be perfectly okay with that, but they were not on different strategies. But Norris had tyres that were 6 laps younger, and the tyres were wearing out fast, which is why they kept on having to throw hard tyres on all the time. They mostly started on mediums, but Hamilton was on softs, Alonso was on hards at the start, as was Guan Yu Zhou, and another driver, I think maybe Hülkenberg. But most were on, all the others were on mediums. But they soon came off those mediums very quick. When, I think, during the safety car period, when Hamilton retired with power unit issues. What a terrible season he's having. His worst ever, officially his worst ever season. Yeah, so that swap between the McLarens, it was strange how Piastri defended that after the race and said, yeah, that's perfectly understandable, it's perfectly good. But he says from a purely sort of like selfish personal point of view, yes, he didn't want to do it, but he totally understands why, and he was perfectly fine with it. And he didn't resist on the track either. Just have another drink. But yeah, and Norris did pull away but didn't manage to catch Leclerc. However, as Norris believes, and it's probably true, I can see, if Norris had been brought in first for the pit stops instead of Piastri, then he wouldn't have got passed by Leclerc anyway in the pit stop phase. That's how Leclerc got past him, and he was so close to him, and he finished 2.5 seconds behind him in the end. So it's Norris should probably have finished 2nd. That's his 14th pole position. Let's just put that 14th, podium position. Record without a win. He held the record jointly with Nick Heidfeld before on 13. As soon as he wins his first race, that record will pass straight back to Nick Heidfeld again, of course, assuming Norris does win a race. He's now raced in, I think, past 100. He's on 102 or 103. Jenson Button, I think he won his first Grand Prix win was his 106th, was it? Or 112th. Very similar anyway. It's very similar positions, Norris, because Button had racked up loads of podiums as well and was always nearly winning, but he was doing all that during the Schumacher dominant years at Ferrari, and he just couldn't break that Ferrari stranglehold, just like Norris can't break the Red Bull one at the moment. So very similar careers, Norris and Button, I would say, at the moment, after 100 odd races. Perez, well, he can sort of blame the car, can't he, for his 5th position. Okay, yeah, Verstappen retires, Perez is then supposed to win, but clearly the Red Bull was struggling. I think his one was struggling in a similar way today. Not with the brake pedal stuck open, but other similar issues to what Verstappen was experiencing. Stroll, great performance there. Look at Tsunoda. I mean, originally Alonso was ahead of Stroll, of course, but we had that big Russell bang at the end, didn't we, on the last lap, was that, or the penultimate lap, where Alonso appeared to slow. Some people are saying he brake tested Russell. That's crazy. As if a double world champion with all the experience of Alonso would mess about and do a brake test like that. It's there are some drivers that might have done that if they were in a tight championship battle. I can think of 3 off the top of my head that would do that if they were in one of them's a current driver, but the other 2 are not. They would do that if in a championship battle, I think, possibly, but not Alonso. He's a professional. So that's crazy. For some reason, he said he was having problems with his battery pickup and things like that. So maybe he just had an issue there, but he clearly couldn't prove it because he was given a 20-second penalty after the race after a long meeting with the stewards. So clearly the team couldn't prove it, that he was having issues at that particular corner. And they have so much data. So yeah, that pushed Stroll ahead of his teammate, and it also pushed Tsunoda up to 7th place. He's driving so well this year, and also the latter half of last year. As soon as RB, AlphaTauri last year, as soon as they re-signed him, which I thought was a big mistake, I thought, no way, you should get one of these other, up-and-coming F2 drivers should step into that seat. I was very surprised and thought that was a big mistake, giving it to Tsunoda, but I was clearly very wrong, because he then, after that, maybe because he was then relaxed, he then drove fantastically well in the last few races last year, and is driving extremely well this year. He's beating Ricciardo. Poor old Ricciardo can't get anything right, can he, in whatever team he goes into. Hülkenberg and Magnussen, fantastic again for Haas. Because we have this divide over here in the championship, we have the top 5 and the bottom 5 really pronounced. That means any point is super important they're not trying to get into the top 5 at all. Alpine would have been wanting to, they would have been expecting to at the start of the season, but after just one race, they would have known that they're definitely in the bottom 5 and currently last. But yeah, fantastic. Hülkenberg has scoring again. That's great. Albon, 11th place as usual. Ricciardo, Gasly. Bottas had yet another sticky wheel nut, wasn't it, or something? Cross-threaded wheel nut that cost him a load of time in the pits again. Joe had a problem with his pit stop as well, a different issue that cost him loads of time in the pits as well. So considering how much time they lost, I'm surprised they finished ahead of Ocon. Well, am I surprised? Ocon is, after all, driving an Alpine. But yeah, possibly they could have got into the points if they hadn't had those problems. And of course, we got Russell, Hamilton and Verstappen crashing. Sargeant was out. So, and the championship, look how tight it is now. 4 points between Verstappen and Leclerc. Obviously, Verstappen will just pull out again, because remember 2 years ago, Verstappen was, I think, 50 points behind Leclerc after 3 races. And of course, Verstappen had the championship wrapped up way before the end of the season, despite being so far behind Leclerc after Australia, which was also round 3 2 years ago. Perez will be a bit happier. He's closed that gap, but he knows that Verstappen is just going to pull it out again. So he's not going to be getting too excited. But Sainz, look at that. Look at him go. 40 points. Only 11 points behind Verstappen. And he was on the operating table during the second race. Incredible. And I did predict it. So, well done me. However, I did predict that Hamilton would be on fire this year. And he isn't. I know the car's not good, but he's not even on fire compared to his teammate. Russell is comfortably beating him. I don't think that suddenly means that Russell is the better driver, of course. It's just a question of getting to grips with the car. Hamilton is struggling to get to grips with the car. Russell is not. In 2022, Russell got to grips with the car better than Hamilton, but in 2023, Hamilton was better than Russell. Let's just hope next year Hamilton doesn't struggle to get to grips with the Ferrari. 8 points, terrible. Aston Martin as a whole, 25 points. It's very disappointing. Look at that, Mercedes, actually, look, just noticed. Mercedes and Aston Martin, less than half the points of McLaren. Great stuff. McLaren, will they get second in the championship? Who knows? I mean, they look like they're heading for third, but you just don't know what's going to happen with upgrades. We saw that last year. An upgrade can go extremely well or it can go extremely badly. It went very well for McLaren last year and it went very badly for Aston Martin last year. So you just don't know how that's going to go. I'm very excited about the next race. But, we still need to see Verstappen beaten on merit. It's no good beating Verstappen when he's left his handbrake on, basically. He didn't. I stress he didn't do anything wrong. It was as he said, and it's a good analogy. It was like leaving a handbrake on. What it felt like for him to drive the car with his left rear brake stuck on. What else was I going to mention? That might be it, I think. Yeah, I think that's it. So, this is a much healthier looking championship table at the moment, but let's not get too excited, yeah? It's still all Verstappen, 100% all the way. And let's hope Sargeant can lift himself up from this massive confidence basher that he's received at the hands of his team, who pulled an all-nighter and went massively over the top and went to great effort just in order to get Sargeant out of the car and his teammate in the car, dearie me. But I think it does, as I said at the start of the season, point towards Sargeant leaving. He's had his shot, and it didn't work. You can't keep him in there forever. There's so many fantastic drivers. Look at Behrman. There's so many fantastic drivers trying to get into Formula One, and we will have lots with, I think, 13 contracts ending at the end of this year. There are going to be lots of new drivers in next year. Definitely Behrman in a Haas. That's nailed on, I think. Right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to subscribe, please do so. Or leave a comment or like the video, anything like that. Or even leave a tip on the thanks button just below the video. And I will see you on the very next video, whatever that may be about. Thank you very much, and goodbye for now.